there is a remarkable fact of, what shall we call it, the change that comes across people's philosophies of government once they get elected president. Until they're president, as long as they're on the outside, there are a lot of people who think that government is too big. And those people running government simply ought to back off. And they ought to trust the American people. They ought to trust the judgment of the American people. They ought to trust the American people to hang on to their own money. After all, as Ronald Reagan used to say, it's their money. It's not the government's money. Thomas Jefferson fell into that category. Jefferson was a strict constructionist. Jefferson famously said that government governs best which governs least. And as long as he wasn't president, as long as he wasn't the government, it seemed to hold together philosophically and politically. But then he became president. And in Jefferson's defense, the real test of this strict construction philosophy came when he was offered, what, the bargain of a lifetime. When he was offered the opportunity to purchase the Louisiana Territory. Now Jefferson is a strict constructionist, looked at his Constitution, and he tried to find under the powers granted to Congress, under the powers granted to the Presidency, the right to purchase foreign territory. And he looked in there, and if you look into your Constitution too, you're not going to find a word about that. So he thought about, well, maybe we should try to find an amendment. We should write an amendment to the Constitution. But then he read his Constitution again, and he realized amending the Constitution is devilishly difficult. You got to get 2/3 of each house, and you got to get 3/4 of the states. And he knew he had enough political enemies that people would try to frustrate him, even if they agreed that it was a good idea. So he simply decided, ignore the matter. Oh, and here the problem too was the perceived volatility of Napoleon, who was the ruler of France at the time, who had proposed this deal. When Napoleon wanted to get rid of Louisiana, wanted to raise some cash. Americans can have this for $15 million. So where's Jefferson going to get the money? He's going to have to go to Congress. Congress is going to have to approve the deal. And so Jefferson decided that, he'd ignore these problems of unconstitutionality, and he would submit the bill to Congress for the money, and Congress, if it voted in favor of the money, presumably would approve the measure. And even Jefferson's opponents had to realize, as much as we would like to make trouble for Thomas Jefferson, this deal is too good to pass up. So everybody who had constitutional scruples decided to swallow the scruples. And I suppose it worked to Jefferson's benefit. He was no dummy when it came to this. He recognized that those people, his political opponents, the ones who would want to make trouble for him, were the ones who had been arguing for a broad construction of the Constitution. And so they were in no philosophical position to say, sorry, Mr. President, you don't have the authority because we don't think a president has the authority to do things that aren't explicitly written in the Constitution. But this happens all the time. We see it, if you're looking for it, in the case of the current administration. When George W. Bush was elected, he bought in, at least he rhetorically bought into the idea that government had become too big. And he repeated the argument of Ronald Reagan, that government wasn't the solution, government was the problem. And a vote for George W. Bush was going to be a vote for a smaller government. Well, in fact, American spending, the government has never grown more. Not during the New Deal, not during the Great Society. Even non-defense spending has grown more under the current president than under Franklin Roosevelt or Lyndon Johnson. And President Bush's supporters have tried to justify this on grounds of something that, until the last 4 or 5 years, would have been thought to be an utter contradiction in terms, a downright oxymoron. They came up with this label, big government conservatism. Well, in America, conservatism is supposed to be all about smaller government. No. Bigger government's going to be more effective. We're going to protect the interests of the people by being bigger. So, was Thomas Jefferson honestly converted to bigger government philosophy? I don't know, but he found it convenient. Was George W. Bush really converted to a bigger government philosophy? What happens is when you're in office, you realize that the only leverage, about the only leverage you have to do favors for your friends is to give them money. That's what government does. If you try to shrink government, all you do is make enemies. Politics is the art of saying no to certain people, the art of saying yes to other people. And if you say yes, it makes you a lot more popular than if you say no. Presidents typically want to get reelected. So there is this tendency when, well, okay, tie goes to the broader interpretation.